Prospect House Media.
And now, prepare yourself for the only weekly podcast you won't want to miss. Welcome to the Ameritocracy Show with Troy Edgar, live from our studios in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C.
Hey everybody, I am Troy Edgar and welcome to the Ameritocracy Show. Thank you for tuning in and checking it out. It is greatly appreciated. This podcast examines the conditions for personal and economic growth and opportunity across America. This week, I'm recording this episode from the NATO Industry Forum in Stockholm, Sweden. I'm honored to have my IBM colleague, Leendert Van Bochoven, on the show, who is the IBM Technology Global Leader for Defense, Intel, and NATO. Leendert and I had just completed a successful 2 days of participating and presenting at NATO on current and future supply chain transformations and technology concepts. Leendert works from Amsterdam in the Netherlands and spends much of his time in Brussels at NATO and across Europe. He has an extraordinary network, and he is a distinguished industry leader and was invaluable to my preparation and the effectiveness with my address to NATO. In corporate America, people that aspire early in their career to be industry leaders need to establish their eminence and work their way from national to global. Once at the global level, you will meet people like Leendert. I thought this would be a valuable episode to see how he has built his career, and he graciously shares his art of building trusting and successful relationships. I hope you enjoy. Good afternoon, Leendert. How are you doing?
Troy, I'm doing very well, man. Good to see you here in Stockholm.
Good to see you too. It's been an honor to be over here with you at the NATO Summit, and it's been a great opportunity to get together face to face and most of all, really to see you in action. Your reputation in the U.S. of your contacts and your experience over here internationally, I thought would be really helpful to get you on the podcast and to kind of get some experience to our listeners so that they can get kind of an idea of how to operate at the global level.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on this one here. It's really a pleasure working with you, and it's been a fantastic 2 days now here in Stockholm at the NATO Industry Forum, which is the annual gathering of NATO with the industry. And so it was an exciting time to be here together. So,
yeah. So what I'd like to do, if you wouldn't mind, is that, for my listeners, we like to talk a lot about different career paths, and we like to look at success and leadership and people that can go out and make a difference. And I think the part that I was really excited about with your story is that, something that I noticed working with you is that, you definitely not only have a perspective of all of Europe, and you serve in a global role, but I think for our listeners, of being able to have an appreciation of what it takes to get to operate at that level, because that's not something you come out of business school or you're ready to go, hey, here's the global world, good luck to you. Yep. So what I thought would be helpful is just to step back and maybe if you wouldn't mind, introduce yourself to the listeners and provide a little bit of the backstory of to how you got to this point in your career.
Yeah, sure. Pleasure. I mean, and again, born and raised in the Netherlands, and have been working actually on the international stage from very early in my career. I'm now almost up to 25 years with IBM, so I hope to celebrate that in December. And before that, I was with an ERP company for, 7.5 years or so, but also in international roles. So I've always had a interest in what's going on internationally because the software world started to really develop as an international world, I would say late 90s and so on. So that was really the time when I entered in that market. Before that, indeed, I went to university. I got my degree in economics, just like my dad, at the same university. By the way, the university is in Rotterdam, so not in Amsterdam, but in Rotterdam. And what's interesting, the Rotterdammers, people from there are known for rolling up their sleeves and doing things, So that's actually one of the best economics programs there. So born and raised, so to say, in the education, I was economist, so to say. And I never thought I would work actually in the IT. At that point in time, I thought it was boring. But ended up in that, and look now, 25 years, or actually, what is it now? 32 years later, I'm here at an IT company, and a global technology company, working in this field. So it's been a fascinating, years.
When you come out of Rotterdam, did you, at that point, knowing where you're at now, did you have aspirations as a person in high school and college and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to go on the road, or was that just accepted like everybody, eventually got jobs that worked across Europe, or,
Actually, the labor market in those days, when I left university, were not that great, actually. So I had a number of applications to different companies and so on, but ended up in a company that is actually was at the forefront at that point in time of the whole ERP wave, so to say. That was the first real end-to-end automation of business processes that was happening. So that was the first wave of ERP implementations that hit. And it was a company in the Netherlands, but with international aspirations. They were serving large corporations around the world. And that's how I grew into it. And so it's been a fascinating period. It was all about rolling up your sleeves and doing things in the field. So I never would have thought afterwards, and looking now back now 25 years later, I didn't have anticipated this, but at least from the very beginning, the international side was always very, very interesting to me, and that's what I worked on from the very first day of my career, actually.
Let me ask you a question, because the ERP space definitely, after I did a corporate career, I went back into ERP, into consulting, and then through consulting did a lot of big, large Fortune 500 ERP programs. We would get young people out of college, and at that point I was kind of a mid-career type person. And in America, especially at that time for the big consulting firms, they were all kind of accounting firms too. So, and they both, accounting and consulting had a mindset that was very similar. On the accounting side, the new recruits were there to get 2,000 hours for auditing, so they go test out in the CPA. And on the consulting side, they were there for 2,000 hours of torture to do anything that was required. And it was really a sorting out process to see who was really committed, right. Whether you can get on an airplane the next day and then you're willing to do anything required to get the client to the next level. And these things are marathons. They're 1 to 2 years long, but for the consultants, they're 80-hour weeks nonstop. What was your first assignment like when you started getting into this? Was it similar to that?
I started out as a trainee, indeed, for that company in the ERP space. And the first thing I had to do is train a lot of people, because we were at the early days in the growth curve of the company and so on. We really had to train a lot of consultants. But also train a lot of clients. So I did a lot of training. So you always have to be ahead of your customer to truly understand what's going on with the system and so on. You have to understand how it works and so on. So I had to train myself a lot and get exposed a lot. Like, how do these processes work in these companies? Because I've always mostly done work in the heavy industries, big manufacturing corporations and so on, or electronics companies and so on. But I had to truly learn, what's the process? How does it work? How does the software work? How does it support the operators? And so I had to spend a lot of time on educating myself, but also helping others understand how the software works. So yeah, I can tell you a lot of hours in the beginning, but it got me to travel as well and explain our software around the world. My first trip to the US was to Chicago.
Oh, that was good.
It was to Chicago, and that was so super impressive for me, because coming from the Netherlands, which is a small country, and but flying to Chicago and then in that city train people in the US on our software was just amazing. So amazing experience, and indeed you spend there 2 weeks then, back to back training, day in, day out with the team. Mm-hmm. And those were fun days, but you really learn the software and how these processes work. And that basically, I took that experience into the defense world, because that was also the early days of the first wave of implementations of ERP in the defense forces. They all started to automate their kind of sort of the transactional processes and the warehousing processes there, transportation, some of the manufacturing processes or support processes, maintenance processes that go on in defense. So that was really the expertise I took from that company into the defense space early in my career at IBM.
At that point, when you started with IBM, now you step into a big company, and IBM's gone through a lot of different metamorphoses over the years. My interaction when I was at Pricewaterhouse, then PricewaterhouseCoopers, and then into the 90s. And then I had worked my way into more of strategy and global program management. I was doing a bunch of big projects, and we sold to IBM. And I remember, because it was audit, Sarbanes-Oxley kind of pushed us to go sell the consulting and side out from under the audit. So I said, IBM. And at that point, IBM had tried to break away from being a computer PC company to being a professional services as one of many of the things it does or did at that time. Those projects didn't go well in the late 90s, so I had recovered a lot of them. So I was thinking, I don't know if I want to go to work at a PC company. And so I had kind of broken off, and I had a bunch of partners that were friends that we were all there. And as I left, they stayed. And definitely IBM to the IBM we see today, it's been quite a journey. But what year did you enter into that, and what was your perspective? Did you fit in right away after coming from a small company into a big company, just in general, maybe not specific to IBM?
No, I mean, when I started in '98, I started on the IBM side, on the consulting side of IBM in those days. And so indeed in 2003, IBM acquired PricewaterhouseCoopers. So I was on the other side, so to say, when this acquisition happened. And it turned out that we saw a whole lot of partners come into IBM, sort of in the consulting space, and I was the deep blue IBMer on the other side. It was an interesting dynamics because we were a minority, so to say, and there were a lot of partners around us. So, but what was interesting, from day one, I continued to lead the team for defense, for the Dutch defense. So I was the only non-PricewaterhouseCoopers guy that actually led an account in the consulting side. So I was on the receiving end, so to say, of PricewaterhouseCoopers coming in. And I've grown, so to say, and I've learned so much from that side of the house on my consulting skills. So I've been going through, I think until, 2009 or so? I stayed in the 2009, 2010, kind of sort of 10 years. I stayed in the consulting side and grew up in that environment. Initially focused on the Ministry of Defense, and that was the first phase, because one of the things I had to learn then was how to respond to tenders. And so my first big exposure from a large company bidding for an ERP project with the Dutch MOD, I learned so much from that. I was leading that effort and so on. And guess what? Then we lost it. I mean, it was really terrible loss for us. Of that program. And so, the good news from that one, the only good thing that came out of that was that I had so much time on my hands that after we had lost it, because I was kind of sort of designated to go lead the delivery of that program, and found myself suddenly sitting on, well, what do we do next? One of the partners picked me up and said, you know what? We see this ERP trend around the world, and so let's do this at a European level. So I took all the expertise, so to say, from the bit that we lost, but then went on to other European countries to say, how can we help you bid for the programs in the other countries? And that turned out to be very successful. So out of a loss, so to say, that I had experienced personally of losing a major bid, like 60 million or so bid in those days, we turned that into success, or in the sense that we saw a lot of ERP programs kicked off across the defense forces. So that's how I got into defense, because I didn't have a defense background, by the way. I've not served in the military. To a certain extent, I wasn't prepared to go into this market, but I had to learn that myself. But going through these processes with our clients, the bidding processes and so on, and the delivery processes, I learned so much from the defense space.
I think it's interesting. I think anybody that's been in the consulting field and you give your blood, sweat, and tears to put in a proposal and you hopefully be successful, and then you don't prevail. And it would be one thing if it's just you by yourself and you have a little bit of a self-pity moment, but it's you and 20 people,
yeah,
and it's usually taking 3 months to 1.5 years, and it's sometimes it's on the back of work, but no one talks about it because it's it's above board. But I hope that the listeners definitely, I think that point you're saying is one of the most important parts, is taking losses and turning that into what did you get out of it?
Absolutely, yeah. No, I mean, so it was a painful, but very, afterwards, when you're going through the moment, you do not appreciate that. I can tell that, because it's pretty bitter. And kind of has a real impact if you lose a large bid like that. Like I said, you've been working on it for months, day and night, to actually get a proposal, a quality proposal out the door, and then losing it. That was a bad experience. But on the other hand, learning from that and say, now how can I apply my insights and work with other teams and say, hey, this is what we should avoid. This is how we should position ourselves. This is what we learned from it. That has been hugely valuable, also for the other teams.
So at this point now, you've taken your career and you've moved it to being kind of across Europe and in an ERP space, within defense.
The first wave of EP implementations happened, so to say, in the 2010, 2012 kind of sort of time frame. Yeah. But in the meantime, we saw some of these programs already kind of sort of drying up. And the question is, how do you continue to have the conversation with the client? And also, where do you look for opportunities to continue to work in the defense space? In those days, a new concept came up, which was called network center of operations. That was all about how do you connect your sensors and the information that you have in the field. How do you connect that and create a situational awareness of that? So in those days, new concepts came up. And so I led a team that was going to look at network center operations and what is our consulting approach, so to say, so that we could shift from, I would say, purely process orientation, a bit more to the sharp end, actually, because that's really all about what is the mission and what is happening in the field. And so we designed solutions for that on the technology of those days. So to a certain extent, you could say, nowadays we see the fruits of that, because technology has become so available at a price point which is much more affordable than it was in those days. So we saw a shift, so to say, from the ERP market to what we call in network center operations, and that is a trend we saw across the alliance. So that's what I did. And then following that, I took an assignment, working for the EMEA chairman of IBM, Larry Hurst, in those days. He saw the potential of those supranational organizations like the EU and NATO, because they were really coming up. And in those days, also NATO changed their acquisition policy from a lowest compliant bid to a best value strategy. And so they applied best value evaluation processes. And that was the time for us to get into NATO, because frankly, we wanted to sell based on value, not so much on cost. And so that was a shift. So in 2010, I joined the EMEA team and became responsible for NATO, and have been building the consulting side of our NATO account. So that's what started in 2010, and I did that until 2015, 2016. Still keeping relationships still going on with NATO. And from 2015, I moved into what's called global markets. So I started to look not just around to consulting, but also to what's the technology portfolio that we have. And so I looked across the brands of IBM. And then in 2021, end of that, moved into what's nowadays called IBM Technology. But now I'm in a global role, looking at technology. How can IBM Technology support our clients, our defense and national security customers globally with top-notch technology. That's really what I'm doing. So I'm a global role now, but I still maintain a lot of contacts here at NATO. So I actually have been working since, 2010 or so in the NATO environment. And so I've grown up, so to say, over the last so many years in that.
Yeah, something I've noticed within IBM, I'll say the three most prevalent businesses are the IBM consulting side, IBM Tech, and then IBM, the company that does still a lot of work in high-tech semiconductors. Yeah. Obviously, they have IBM Research and a lot of stuff that's out there that really kind of supports all of us coming up for new things. What I've found interesting, since I've been here, is that IBM Technology and IBM Consulting, when working together, very powerful. And I know when, even over the last couple of days here at NATO, really a brand differentiator. You'll be talking to one of the big four type companies, Deloitte, Accenture, KPMG, EY, et cetera, that may be really in one area and it's services, and then you got on our side this technology, especially with all the investments they've been making in Watson X and all of the AI. You really see it too in our stock price. I think that the street really recognized that. And I think that portfolio really kind of helps the clients with a little bit of an easier buy. But it reminded me a little bit when I first came in of Oracle, when they started buying up a bunch of companies trying to compete against SAP. And I would be in meeting with the CFO or CIO of a Fortune 500 company, and they'd call me and they'd say, "Hey, Troy, can you come in? I'm meeting with Oracle." It's like, "Sure." And I would get there and there would be like 4 or 5 people showing up. They represented all the different brands. There was the application people, the hardware people, database, and the client was just confused. Yeah. And I think something that I see you doing, even though you say, "Hey, I'm IBM Technology," your background was consulting, and you can talk on both sides.
But first of all, I think that's hugely important. Don't show up, so to say, with the IBM bus across, let's say, with all these different interests, I'm saying. We should try to think outside in. Yeah. Think, what does the customer need? And there's one logo we have, one brand we have. And of course, that means that we have a combination of IBM technology and consulting. But I think the combination of that is very, very powerful, especially when it's backed up by IBM Research and really setting some of the trends that are so important for our customers. Nowadays, technology is at the heart of the geopolitical competition that's going on. And that makes it extremely interesting to be in this market at this point in time with technologies like AI, the whole data and analytics portfolios, quantum, where that's going, quantum safe, the whole cyber area. Those are areas that are at the heart of the geopolitical competition, which is going on right now. And so I think we're in a fascinating time from that perspective. And we're trying to help, I would say, NATO, the allies, the allied nations and so on, to actually position them in the best possible way in this global competition that's going on. And so I think that's our duty as a company, to represent that and give the men and women in uniform the best capabilities to execute their mission.
See, I think that's where you and I have a very similar mindset or philosophy, is that, for me, even coming back and working for IBM, a lot of people were like, "You're in Washington, D.C." My portfolio, my whole business segment's there. And a lot of people are like, "Why is that?" And it's like, I feel like it's a part of an extended public service. Yeah. I'm at a point in my career, I've been very blessed, so I don't wake up every day wondering, how am I going to, feed myself? It's like, do I enjoy what I do? And do I feel like I'm making a difference? And kind of on that note, Leendert, I would like to transition a little bit to what we're doing here today. And what I thought, because it's a perfect segue from how you've started about, technology and the enablement, not AI, and industry is always, a lot of people are trying to figure out, like, where are we at, what are we doing? NATO, is a, it's a lot in the news now, but I think for my listeners, and what I've always try to do on this show is that we're not trying to take stands. We're trying to provide information and let the listeners get a perspective of things. So from your perspective, and you and I have had some pretty deep philosophical discussions of NATO and what the objective is, and then how does industry like technology, which is what we're representing here today, fit into that?
Yeah. So, NATO, first of all, is a defensive alliance. It is defending 1 billion people. I mean, if you really add up the global population of NATO members, 31 nations. I mean, we're here in Sweden, so we hope very soon that NATO will be the 32nd allied nation. That's really important. And like I said in the beginning, we need to give our clients the best capabilities they have in order to defend the alliance. It's a defensive alliance. And through my work, so to say, with NATO, I mean, I really got a view of what's going on the geopolitical area and how to learn from them, how do you position yourself. And that's why nowadays the role of industry in these geopolitical matters is hugely important. And NATO, that was the theme for this conference here in the NATO Industry Forum, which is literally a meeting of the minds between, I would say, top leadership, NATO leadership, with top executive leadership from corporations. Like, how do we work better together? And of course, there's I would say the traditional defense primes are in there, who are doing a lot of, build a lot of capabilities, for the alliance and so on. But nowadays, there's always a huge role for providers of technology, like emerging disruptive technologies, as they're called, like AI and quantum, cyber technologies and so on. And now we see a third type of industries coming into that. Let's say companies with dual use technologies, small and medium startups that really see an opportunity to invest in security technology. And so they're all together here in this NATO Industry Forum here the last 2 days. So this was a really good conversation in light of the geopolitical situation that we have in Europe. There is war on the European continent at this point in time. That is going on. It's terrible. And so we had representatives from Ukraine Armed Forces also in the audience and also on stage who shared a kind of sort of sobering message about the state Europe is in, and especially their country, of course. And so they're really defending their country as good as they can. The NATO as such is not involved, but it is the NATO nations that are actually providing capabilities and support, and we should do that. And so I find it fascinating to be on this area between geopolitical developments and the industry developments, and to be in the middle of all that, and especially with the portfolio of emerging disruptive technologies like what we provide as IBM.
Yeah, it was interesting when you think about when I was getting ready to come over and be a part of this this forum. Like any endeavor that I've had, whether it was to go and go through Senate confirmation to be the CFO, or whether it's starting a company or going into a new company. The first time I remember I went into Toyota, didn't know anything. And the first thing I did was very similar to the first thing I did with NATO, which is just a tremendous amount of research. You never want to come in to a potential client. This has been your client. For me, it was new. And you got to kind of start from the beginning. 1949, NATO started, and then now it's like 31, potentially 32 countries involved. And, and there's a lot of history. And I think for me, there was an appreciation and then actually experiencing it. I mean, this is a very special group. Something that I noticed in this group, though, as I worked alongside of you the last couple of days and really the weeks to get ready to come and do this, is it seems like relationships are a big deal in this space. And the thing that I noticed is it wasn't just relationships with NATO members. It was relationships, and this is you, by the way, the relationships and the people that we had great opportunities and great discussions with, both on the stage and off, were industry members, competitors, a lot of different nations. And what I realized quickly is it must have taken a tremendous amount of time to cover ground, because your stories always started with, yeah, I talked to you in Madrid, or hey, yeah, when we got together anywhere across the different parts of Europe. It was so there quite an investment to talk about the relationships as a global leader as you are now, and the investment in time, because your job is definitely to keep knowledgeable of what we do at IBM, but you really seem to have a knack for being focused on the experience of the relationship.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, where to start? I mean, first of all, I think these long-term trusted relationships are extremely important. I mean, because the topics that you're dealing with are pretty significant in the sense that, and so it needs to be trusted. Yes, you need to have a clearance, but also you need to maintain those relationships. And literally, I met here a lieutenant general who's now responsible for acquisition of one of the nations, who I met first time as a lieutenant colonel. So can you imagine? I mean, so all those years, I mean, we kind of sort of stayed in touch, and every now and then you would meet and so on at meetings and so on. So I think it's hugely important to maintain longevity, build those trusted relationships. Take a serious interest in what your customer is doing. Learn their language. I mean, that's one of the mistakes I sometimes see technology companies or IBM is making, is that we're sending in people who can speak IT very well, but they don't know how to articulate this in client language. I think this is so important to learn to speak in the acronyms that the customer uses. I mean, yes, they're full of acronyms here. It's just amazing how they make sometimes acronyms of acronyms. But you got to learn that. You got to take an interest in what are they doing, what's the mission they're on, and talk to them in that language, so to say, with them. So I think educate yourself about what's going on. I mean, what was eye-opening for me, in 2008, I took the first class with Rand in the US. That was on emerging security challenges. I mean, me coming from the Netherlands, small country, this was the first time I was really exposed to really some strategic thinking from a US perspective. That opened my eyes, like, for if you're the biggest in the world, somebody will try to attack you. And that's a whole different concept than what I knew from the Netherlands. So I learned so much from that. I mean, so I spent a week with Rand in those days talking about emerging security challenges. Later on, I was fortunate, I mean, blessed enough, so to say, my boss approved a 2-week class at Harvard Kennedy School. So I spent, in 2013, I spent 2 weeks at Harvard Kennedy School on a program which is called the National and International Security Executives. And that was the most fascinating conversation. Like, there was I think 72 or so very senior officials from militaries around the world, and there were a handful of industry folk. And we would just go through all the strategic questions on that. So that was, I think that's another thing. I mean, you got to invest also in the education, educate yourself about what's really important to your customers. Mm-hmm. I mean, otherwise, why would they take you serious?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's one of the things I did. So, and IBM has been very good to me in the sense allowing me to go there. Mm-hmm. And the last round that I did there as well was leadership decision making. That was a bit at a higher level, but there were so many military leaders in that audience, mm-hmm. and you learn from how they make decisions, how they evaluate insights and data that is being shared. So it's most fascinating to get that education, so that is part of your the approach. So
let me ask you this, Leendert, as we get near the end here and kind of closing, I guess the one thing I would say too, last night we were in Stockholm at the City Hall, a very nice event where the Nobel Peace Prize is kind of laid out. And and it was a lot more of a casual event for, 500 or 600 of our closest friends, but everybody was just super nice. And it reminded me of my times of doing probably 5 to 8 years here in Europe and going all over. I built great relationships, and some of them even today, like, my wife and I would come over, and we had a friend, and she was an exec at a Fortune 500 company. And, you don't usually go and stay at executives' houses. But here, it's like they were offended if we didn't stay. And it was a beautiful 3-story, we had our own floor, but it was, it was also kind of hard to explain expenses. Like, hey, how come you guys don't have hotel costs when you're over there? It's like, and you don't want to say I'm staying at the client's house. But that level of intimacy where it goes so trusted that you actually become friends, but it's such a sharpened relationship as that relationship, just specifically to give you kind of an idea, if I had done something incorrect or messed up, or my team did, or the company that I represent did, I never had to take it serious, or I never took criticism or frustration to heart, because we still had a very professional relationship. Like, you're allowed to be disappointed, you're allowed to get irritated, but I mean, I don't even sometimes have friendships like that in the U.S., and they're not my clients, they're my friends. So it's just, I think in Europe, and I noticed with you, and that's why I thought the relationship, and I really appreciate you sharing like kind of how to build and educate. I hope the listeners get something out of that. But as we kind of get towards the end of this discussion, any other types of ideas like that, or anything that you'd like to leave with the listeners to kind of help them out?
Yeah, so indeed, I mean, I've worked along several people who have met at various points in my career, so to say. I mean, they were my clients, where I'm still maintaining a relationship even after that person is now retired from the military. And we're still comparing notes, so to say, on developments. And so I think it's always really important that you display a level of integrity with your clients and so on, but also directly support them, see what you can do, bend over backwards, see if you can help them out with the challenges they're faced with in those days. And through that experience, you get really close with your customers. And so that's where they learn about your strengths and weaknesses as a corporation or as an individual, but also on the other side, I mean, what works, what doesn't work, and so on. So going through that together, I think is hugely important, and you learn so much from that. But also, by the way, and maybe it is in part because this is a very international community, and we all have a common objective, so to say. I think the defense space is hugely international. We always compare notes. What have you learned? What have you learned? And so on. It's not like competitive, like, I mean, if you have 2 banks, so to say, they would go after each other's throats, so to say. But the allies we work with are allies. That's what that's why they want to learn from lessons learned from Australia, from Germany, from the UK. They want to hear what's going on in the US. And that's something that's really fascinating in the role that I'm in right now. I can connect the dots, so to say, around the world between developments that they may not realize, and certainly they're keenly interested in that, to learn that, say, what can we learn from what's going on in the other countries and so on. Of course, without disclosing the classified information, because most of what we do is let's say in the initial side is not classified. But the thing is all about how do we tell and share insights from around the world and bring that so that the others can learn from that. And that's what I really appreciate. I'm always trying to be in a relationship with the client, so to say, and try to bring something of interest to them. I mean, you continue to put, so to say, money in the bank, in the sense that these are the insights I have. I mean, I think that's interesting for you as well. First of all, it means that do you truly understand what your customer's interested in, and get feedback on that? Second, you share something of interest in it. And so that's how we connect the dots around the globe. And our strategy is based on the insights that we have from these different countries. And that's what we share. That's what we stand for. And that's how, well, when we meet around the world, we talk about, hey, we have a shared understanding of what's the strategy, where are we going, and what have you seen around the world? How can we learn from each other in this global competition that we're in? So.
Yeah, I had a Washington, D.C. lobbyist on, Ryan Levitt, and one of the most successful lobbyists in D.C. And this guy, I asked him about his ability to make relationships, and he said something very similar to you. He kind of put a fine point on it, said, be available to help people.
100%, yeah.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised because that that availability becomes, I won't say a dependency, but they know, and sometimes, and I see it too a little bit with the relationships that I've been able to be an audience to the last couple of days, is like it definitely crosses over the line sometimes of professional to sometimes personal, but I think it's because you guys are living a lifestyle where this NATO is a process that does travel across Europe.
Yeah, sometimes a bit of a traveling circus, but I mean there's sometimes a bit too much of that. But because we also have to do work, but. During these events that you have around the world, I mean, around the NATO capitals and so on, you really develop very close relationships with them. Yeah. And so that helps a lot to build the trust, the longevity of the relationship. I mean, that's the way how NATO operates, so to say. It's how they go to do their business by going through these capitals.
Leendert, I just wanted to tell you that I really appreciated you taking some time, and and I think having the opportunity to work with you over here has just been a real pleasure. And I also appreciate being somebody that's willing to share your network and be able to be effective in the name of what we're trying to do here. And so, thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks, Troy. Thanks for coming over all the way to Stockholm. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Good deal. Thank you. Well, you have a safe flight out tonight.
All right. Same to you. Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks again for joining me today on the Ameritocracy Show. Be sure to follow me on social media and our website at troyedgar.com, where you can get more information and sign up for my weekly email. I hope you have a great week.